With 84 minutes on the clock, it may have been a familiar scoreline and a familiar feeling for everyone of an Arsenal persuasion. But this was not the same Arsenal team. It may have been a 15-minute turnaround that saw them heal some very painful scars, but as today's analysis is going to demonstrate, Arsenal's performance was indicative of a team with more ideas suddenly, more solutions, more urgency, but equally, this was not as simple as Arteta taking the handbrake off. The handbrake was off, but this result that feels so significant, although nothing has been decided yet, was part of a direction, in my opinion, that has been taking shape subtly throughout the season. But against Newcastle, it finally clicked. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. Let's take a deep breath. This one was massive. But let's talk why. Fast, vertical, staggered play is on the rise for Arsenal this season. That's a line you've heard me use before, and it was even more prevalent against Newcastle in terms of importance. It doesn't come off all the time, otherwise everyone would do it, but Arsenal gave themselves a platform to kickstart these 1-2 touch sequences, and how they did that is where we are going to start today. It's all about being tactically okay with the chaos that might come from this. It's about individuals on the pitch too, but also a collective urgency and intention. This was Arsenal's deep build-up, rather typical on first look, with split centre-backs, Rice and Zubimendi playing with their heights and their markers, as Rice makes the double movement from high, then low, to separate from Bruno and play the wall pass. Zubimendi and Timber have pinned their men higher, allowing Mosquera to carry up under no pressure. Trossard, if you watch in this sequence, was Arsenal's biggest mover early on. Calafiori, in a much more touchline focused role, freed up Trossard to pinch on the inside of the pitch, and it often saw Trossard float free, but control of the ball, of possession, is a hard fought thing, and Raya launched it regularly from early on. But it's what this base I've just gone through allowed Arsenal to do after that was so telling of this evolution in their approach. Again, it feels more like an evolution rather than a stark change. Here, Arsenal bait the press to maximise the space between the lines. Again, pretty conventional, but this structure we see from Arsenal upfield is not. A narrow, clustered front three, with Eze in the soft zone for the knockdown. He's joined by Rice and Zubimendi, who get the jump on Bruno and Joelinton and secure the second ball. But it's what Arsenal do next that is so critical. It's not about getting the ball on the floor and building territory slowly and steadily. It's about Zubimendi hitting it immediately onto Timber's off-ball dart. It's about Timber whipping the cross in early. It's about this high and central floating from Eze, which will become more apparent as this video goes on. It's by being rewarded by sneaking into these zones where the ball is going to drop, because spaces close so quickly, especially against this Newcastle 4-5-1. Small windows might be all you get. So let's look at some more examples. A minute later, Raya launches it up to Calafiori, with Arsenal much happier against Newcastle to go long at different angles and create more favourable matchups. It's Rice on hand for the knockdown once again, and Calafiori brings in Trossard, who he's freed up inside. The swiftness of Trossard's shift to Timber, how Timber provokes Murphy to jump before giving and going into the vacated space with Saka, the first touch connections, the inside drive, how Timber's eyes are looking up for an angle into Gyökeres, and this still image here is for me the most important part of Arsenal's performance against Newcastle, and I'm going to get on to why, don't worry. But as the passage continues, Gyökeres sets up the shot really well. He slips on contact, which for me is probably because he's trying to do now so many things with the speed dial turned up, but the ideas and movement prior to this have a lot to like about them. Before we return to the shot I paused on, the first half was by far Gyökeres' best game knitting us together, helping it stick for us when we were forced long, and intertwined with that is how he was able to move across the front line, kickstarting some more free-flowing Arsenal transitions. Eze's release game is a game changer, as I've maintained. And even though this stems from a Newcastle set piece, Saka's diagonal movements are not just refreshing, but his adaptability across zones, how he can run off the ball, then hold up play and play runners in, all in one, is something that can really tie us together. He brings it down, and the penalty, the less said about that, the better, comes after that, with Gyökeres sniffing and pouncing. To be a bit more freeform then, when breaking, is to encourage these kinds of connections. Zubimendi or Saka hooking it or clipping it over to Eze, who plays at first touches and releases. Again, look at how important winning those second balls are, but it's the intent to play immediately and at speed here, which makes it pop. Trossard drops to open up the 1v1 in this example for Gyökeres on the long ball. Gyökeres can get into these positions at times where he's just sort of leaning on his man, a little bit stuck, but we cluster on the second ball again, and Trossard bundles it to Eze, and it's our intentions after securing the knockdown that felt so different, because Eze forces the collapse, he pauses, then brings in Zubimendi darting off the ball as usual, and in 2 touches Zubimendi has brought in Saka and we have a corner. This time it's Saka on the bouncing ball, getting close to teammates, slipping in Timber and continuing his run to crisscross with Gyökeres, drifting across that last line on the shoulder to shoulder where Gyökeres is a really tough matchup. Eze's hinging movement high is nice too, and Saka can open up the pitch after being found. Look at how when Rice isn't always the one pinning high, and when he is set lower, he can pick his moments to offer us the out on the carry. And he always does that little motion to attract the right back inside before moving it on to the left wing really, really well. So we had done well, but the frustration with not taking potentially some chances and not having the penalty break was compounded with Woltemade's header. We were in a position that had been so damaging to us in the past. So, enter this shot again, the most significant tactical takeaway for Arsenal, and it allows us to bridge into our intentions in more settled play. It's a weird thing to watch as a fan analyst, a team experimenting in real time ahead of you, but there was real success to this as well, which I'm going to break down now. In settled play, this was the balance we strove for, Rice and Zubimendi finding that natural tilt between them, with Rice opened up lower and Zubimendi hunting for gaps to accelerate in the pockets, with Calafiori hugging wide, Eze and Trossard are twinning inside between the lines, but Timber has also promoted, allowing Saka to double up with them in the pockets. On a side note, I think if both were fit, one of Hincapié or White would have played to add a little bit more pop and stretching for us from these wide zones. But a lot still has to happen from this point on. So, watch Zubimendi and watch Eze stack centrally, opening up the lane for Rice to wrap one into Saka. If all goes to plan, Zubimendi, who is going to be freed in that pocket, gets a bounce pass from Saka and he clips it over to Timber, but Saka's fouled instead. This comes just before half-time. Again, Rice and Zubimendi are both actively experimenting with their positioning. The block is low, so they are both deep, and Timber promotes to balance things in that high pocket, a zone Zubimendi himself frequently takes up to not make everything so ball to feet for Arsenal. But you cannot tell me that this isn't an Arsenal with an evolving outlook on how to attack these kinds of defensive setups, and this is what I've been building towards. Look at that stack between the lines. It's almost a kind of diamond shape, high and central. That doesn't make it easy to play into, but Rice takes the risk, he plays the pass. It's an eye of the needle pass through to Eze, but it's also very well disguised from Rice, whipping it back across his body. But what does all of this matter? Let's analyse the structure of this cluster or this diamond. Eze and Trossard are close. One of them becomes a kind of backboard, which Eze is here, meaning he's the one that's playing back to goal, forcing Newcastle players to collapse onto him and free up space for Trossard, who's the releaser, the more active foil for Gyökeres, who is left to lean on the last line instead. Obviously, a much better involvement for him. And this is exactly what happens, but remember, it doesn't make it straightforward. Gyökeres is closed down, but he wins the bouncing ball, finding Saka, who maybe with a better pass into him or a better touch, would have had a settled 1v1 with Burn. We've gone from this, where shifting side to side seems the only option, to this in seconds, an attack that is running at the Newcastle backline from within their block. Now it's time for the second half, and where we can get caught up in setups, overloads, tactical details. Arguably the most important thing for me was that this time, chasing the game, the team felt like they were trying to win it from not minute 80, minute 85, but from minute 50. How many times have I used the words urgency and immediacy on the channel? So let's add on top of that some noteworthy tactical points. Let's unpack the game first before Arsenal's substitutions. The same clusters are set up in the middle, with Rice and Zubimendi getting the swings right in their positioning, whether it was Zubimendi adding a body higher up, whether it was time for the pair to swap sides, whether it was time for both to come low, because in the first half things did at times feel a little bit flatter, waiting instead of actively baiting those spaces to open up inside the block. But when Newcastle did force a pass back in the second half, look at how you can open up a lane to punch the ball back through and have more space to play in actually because you've been forced back. That's something to keep an eye on this season, that more deliberate baiting through back passes for Arsenal. Even as the clock ticked on and we were face to face with that familiar feeling, this was a team with more ideas, more solutions. Zubimendi and Rice in this passage switch sides. Rice offers us that little bit of drive, and this is what I'm talking about when I want to use Rice's off-ball movement to better effect. Here, he's drawing a backline deeper, allowing Timber to add his own impetus, taking a first touch that sets him on the carry. Carries force collapses, remember. They force defenders to make decisions. Timber attracts, finds Eze, who, as soon as he uses those feints to eliminate centrally, gets people in a panic. Tonali is now jumping, but the key is Eze not going into Zubimendi straight away, but allow Trossard to do that, who is in that backboardy role we previously spoke about. And this keeps Zubimendi open and able to offer his own solutions in the final third, which are basically moving opportunistically or playing these little slips or clips from outside the block. We've packed the last line again. We are forcing them to make decisions, this Newcastle backline. Think 2-3 ways at a time. Pope again turns us away. There were rotations, balls in behind, attempted dribbles, a lot of what you would ask for against this kind of defence. There were the risks taken to lose the ball and looking to counter-press on that to open up new unexpected spaces. And one of the things we as fans have to accept if we are asking and demanding more of this is just that, the risk showing itself. But when you have Declan Rice protecting, suddenly you might be able to live with that a bit more, when the time is right, of course. Now it was time for the subs, for the finishers, and although we entirely gave up on someone occupying a left-back zone more traditionally, the intent and the ideas remained. It's the same sequence and setup through the lines. Zubimendi drops to play the initial line breaker. Merino is our backboard, and say what you want, but Merino swivels, his flicks, his tempo when he's used like this is some of the best in the squad. Eze becomes the releaser, and this is where he and Mateta form such a dangerous pairing. He crisscrosses with Gyökeres, carrying before slipping him in at an angle. It's a brilliant run and it's a brilliant pass. Again, there's a slip from Gyökeres. Maybe there is a split second shorter he could have taken, but the immediacy of everything else is spot on. Now Ødegaard was on the pitch, and the pleasing thing that he was more of a straight swap with Zubimendi, forming a pivot with Rice that could swap, overload, shift around and just play as a pair. One would move up the pitch to open up the space for the other on the ball, and as I've always maintained, it should not be as strict as swapping Ødegaard and Rice on the ball. Let them arrive in these different zones, Rice on the right, Ødegaard drifting left. That's where the most interesting connections are made for me. It's about how Declan Rice can roam and slip on Bruno's blind side here, and Ødegaard keeping the block constantly moving from these deeper inside left spots. It's about how Rice can have some more live ball, open play whipped crosses like this, with runners like Eze, Merino, Gyökeres to hit. You can push a line back through this, you can win the knockdown, or like Merino is here, you can pin with Gyökeres arcing onto Ødegaard's Trivela pass. We've finally seen that Trivela ball again. This is just a side thought too, but I wonder how much of Ødegaard's sort of lateral movement and freedom came from not funneling it down a Saka-less right-hand side, maybe Mikel was more ready to allow that freedom for Ødegaard, which should not be the case if that is so, but it's just a thought from me. Now it is crunch time though. Ødegaard opens up to Rice, who can drive us up the pitch. Ødegaard can arrive with that momentum on the left-hand side, which sees him close off his body towards the touchline, and that is what encourages his more vertical play when he is further left, as he's pressed from behind. I think not being static really helps this for Ødegaard. Miles knows his more roamy sort of role in that left back come left wing berth, so you may put it down to another corner for Arsenal, but when corners, as I hope I've shown, lie downstream from so many tactical points that created these conditions for us on the pitch, it's hard to push back or knock them too much. Whether it's the dynamics on the pitch, whether it's a change in intent and urgency, whether it's simply allowing your main guys to take responsibility, for Eze to try and create in cramped zones, Ødegaard to arrive in different zones, Rice to whip some balls in, which is where the Gabriel corner goal initially comes from. This was a performance from Arsenal with a deserved result at the end of it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. This could be a really significant, pivotal result for Arsenal to build up ahead of steam as the season progresses now. But I really hope you've enjoyed. I'll catch you very, very shortly in the next one. See you later.